Good morning, everyone. It is November 15th. Going to talk about the war between Russia and Ukraine briefly here. We will start in the northern region up here in the Kharkiv region, talk a bit about what's going on with regard to Bakhmut and Avdiivka, as well as Kherson. So moving in towards Kharkiv, we look specifically at the front lines near Kupiansk, which is right here. And the front line here is pretty long. It runs north to south along this entire axis where the line of contact varies across multiple locations. You might see little nodes here or there, and I'll zoom in a bit and kind of run the gamut here. But these little nodes where we see small outcropping specifically here, and then as you move north, you have the one up towards Kupiansk. That is here. And then obviously the ones that jut along this entire front line. These are all areas where Russia is trying to push hard to take ground from Ukraine. They have installed a significant amount of reserves. The Russians have pushed a lot of reserves in this region and are renewing offensive operations. One of the key features here that comes with what Russia's trying to do is to get a hold of Kupiansk. This is a major point. Obviously, you can see logistically, this is a big deal with 4 crossroads as well as a major rail hub being here. If Russia can push into the region and take this location, it becomes very difficult for Ukraine logistically. The problem the Russians have is they're using dismounted troops. Often these are part of their Storm Z units, which are the conscripted inmates that are being just thrown at the meat grinder. However, it is a consistent push by Russia. They are consistently throwing people at this problem in the attempt to cut Kupiansk off from Ukrainian territory. The problem, though, is there's a river that runs through here, as well as Kupiansk actually sits on the high ground. And I've talked about this before. So as long as Russia continues to just throw dismounts at this, I don't think they're going to be successful enough to really affect anything in Kupiansk until they put some armor on the ground, potentially. Now, in order to mitigate some of the steeper high ground, Russia has been pushing from this axis towards this highway right here in order to try to almost flank the villages in this region to take Kupiansk. It presents a better opportunity for dismounts to get to Kupiansk. However, the problem they have is many of these dismounts with their lightly armored vehicles have a more open area to cross when it comes to defending against artillery. This becomes basically a graveyard for things like cluster munitions if you are using lightly armored dismounts to try to move across the battlefield. So you lose the cover of the forested areas up here, but with the lack of success Russia's been having in trying to push this way, they have thrown a significant amount of troops and continue to try to break through Ukrainian defenses here. The Ukrainians seem to be holding out. Now, moving southward towards Bakhmut, we see the Russians have actually transitioned from defensive operations to offensive operations as a fresh round of reserves have come onto the battlefield here. And these reserves have reinforced both north and south of Bakhmut. And I'll zoom in a bit here for you guys so you can see a little better here. With focus on 3 areas. First is Klitschkiivka, second is Andriivka. Now, one key, and then the third is obviously up in northern Bakhmut near Yehidne there. So one key thing on the southern portion of Bakhmut, we talked about how much of Andriivka was liberated. It still is held in Ukrainian hands, but the front lines here used to run like this. They used to run a bit further in, and we've seen Russians push inward here, and here with their renewed offensives taking place. Basically, Russia is trying to regain lost positions to the south of Bakhmut. When it comes to Yehidne to the north, Russian forces are advancing towards Chasiv, which, let me go back up there so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Up here, the forces here are moving this way across a broad front. Again, Ukrainian gains are still present, but they're being chipped away by the Russians in this area. Generally, in the Bakhmut sector, across this entire front line, the Russians have significantly increased the pressure, significantly increased the fight on the offensive side going towards the Ukrainians, including a step up of drone usage, a step up of infantry usage, as well as reinforced reserves in the thousands have shown up, making it difficult for Ukraine to hold the territory in this region. Like most of the regions, you'll see a bend, don't break strategy here, where they try to attrit the Russian forces, kill as many as they can, kill or destroy as many vehicles and pieces of equipment as they can, while giving up limited amounts of ground. So we're talking trading a few kilometers of ground for tens of thousands of Russian troops dead. That's kind of the idea going into the winter right now, so that they can create a defensive position and a defensive structure that holds while with their current force structure, while allowing the larger, better trained forces to build up and create the possibility for further offensive operations in 2024. We are seeing much of the same along the Avdiivka axis, where we see the Russians pushing hard to the north and to the south of Avdiivka. The last bit of major ground gain was a few weeks ago when they took the dirt mound. It's really just a trash mound, but this trash mound does give overwatch to basically a valley over Avdiivka. This is, again, Ukraine bending, not breaking. They're countering by pushing hard there. The Ukrainians are countering there. And they're also looking at ways to probe to the outskirts near Krasnohorivka here to try and cut off Russian units. But again, with the winter months, a lot of this front line may stagnate, and Ukraine allowing the push inward to kill more troops is what we're seeing here. Now, zooming out and moving to Kherson, because this is really the only other area where a lot of the fighting is taking place, as much of the Tokmak area, Robotyne, that's stagnated. So looking at the fight near the Dnieper River, Kherson region, the Ukrainians have established bridgeheads in Krinky, where the largest amount of fighting is taking place, as well as here along the Dnieper River and further south down in here. Russians continue to use artillery to push on the Ukrainians here to try to drive them off, but the bridgehead seems to be holding, and this is a pretty strong indication that Russia is quite weak in this region. In fact, there was discussion of Russia potentially reinforcing from other regions to come down and stop the movements, but the Russians assess that their artillery can keep the Ukrainians at bay here. What could be problematic is if Ukraine is able to get armor on the battlefield here, get armor across, but unfortunately that requires bridging. And if you're not quick with your bridging to cross this river, there's really no way that Ukraine is going to drive deep into Russian-held territory without that, especially without air support as well. Both sides using attack helicopters, both sides using aircraft for support, but there just isn't enough air superiority to give Ukraine the upper hand here. However, the fact of the matter is the Ukrainians occupying this bank away from the logistics capability that has to cross the river is pretty significant. And the fact that the Russians are struggling to drive units off the bank of the Dnieper River is pretty telling on Russian capabilities and the lack thereof, really, of Russian capabilities. So this continues to hold for Ukraine, and the Ukrainians continue to push forces across the river. Really, only thing that is stopping a big push here for Ukraine is the large amount of Russian artillery that is being resupplied, frankly, by North Korea. And that is what we are looking at on the battlefield so far for the last 48 to 72, 96 hours, 3-4 days with regard to Russia and Ukraine as we start to head into these winter months on the battlefield.